They say no parent should ever bury their child. But on that grey Wednesday morning I did. The church smelled faintly of lilies and damp coats. The carpet gave under every step like it was absorbing our sorrow. My son Daniel lay in a polished mahogany coffin, 34 years old, brilliant, healthy, gone in a flash from what the doctors called a massive heart attack. People whispered. They always do at funerals. So young, stressed these days. Poor Ava, who wasn't even there. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I kept glancing at the back doors, half expecting her to rush in wearing black, face pale, eyes red. Instead, only cold air drifted through when latecomers entered. 37 chairs filled. I counted them because counting felt safer than feeling. 37 souls came to say goodbye, but not his wife. When the pastor asked if anyone wanted to share memories, I stood up because someone had to. My voice sounded foreign through the microphone, steady when I wanted it to break, breaking when I needed it to hold. I talked about Dan's first baseball glove, about the time he built a go-kart from lawnmower parts, about the way he laughed when things went wrong. What I didn't say was how quiet he'd become lately, how his messages had shortened, how he'd started cancelling dinners with excuses that felt rehearsed. Afterward, people pressed my hands, offered casseroles, sympathy, cliches. I thanked them all and forgot every face. The funeral director, practiced in sadness, asked gently, "Mr. Walker, shall we wait a few more minutes for your daughter-in-law?" "No," I said. "Let's begin." By evening, the sky had turned the color of old pewter. I came home to an empty kitchen that smelled of coffee I hadn't brewed. The house hummed with silence. I poured a drink I didn't need and sat at the table staring at my phone. I'd called Ava 6 times that week. Each call went straight to voicemail. I'd told myself she was grieving in her own way. But grief doesn't post vacation photos. I don't know what pushed me to open Instagram. Curiosity, anger, maybe instinct. I'd never used it before. My thumb hovered hesitant, like opening a door I couldn't close. Her profile popped up instantly, Ava CW, a picture of her and Dan from their last anniversary, both smiling, her head on his shoulder. It almost fooled me into thinking things had been fine. Then I scrolled. First came dinner photos, clinking glasses, boutique shopping in Phoenix, dated 2 days after his death. Then came the photo, Ava, standing on a white beach under Mexican sunlight, wearing a bright red bikini that screamed anything but mourning. A cocktail in one hand, the other around Marco Ruiz, our gardener. The caption read, "Life's too short. Cheers to new beginnings." For a long minute I couldn't breathe. My hand tightened until the phone creaked. The ocean behind them glowed turquoise. Marco's grin was careless, triumphant. And she looked happy. Not pretending, not forced, radiant. I reread the caption until the letters blurred. The screen light painted her smile across my dark kitchen walls. The contrast made me dizzy. Church shadows, coffin wood. Now this digital carnival of sunlight and sin. Comments flooded beneath the post. "You deserve happiness. Girl, so proud of you for moving on. Finally free. Free." I thought of the moment the coffin had lowered, the thud of earth hitting wood. I had whispered, "Rest now, son." All the while, his wife was somewhere else, whispering, "Cheers." I pushed the phone away, as if distance could erase the image. My stomach churned. 8 years she'd been part of our family. 8 years of birthdays, barbecues, Christmas mornings. I'd defended her when Dan complained she spent too much, traveled too often, cared too little. "She's young," I'd said. "Give her time." I was wrong. I walked to the liquor cabinet, poured another drink, then another, until the ice melted faster than I could swallow. The refrigerator hum sounded like mockery. That's when my phone buzzed again. At first I ignored it. Probably another condolence text from someone who didn't know what to say. But something made me look. Unknown number. Only one line. "Dad, come to my house. Now, don't tell anyone." Signed, Dan. I stared until the words rearranged themselves into nonsense. The phone slipped from my hand, hit the tile, spiderwebbed the screen. The message still glowed through the cracks. I told myself it was a sick prank. Someone hacked his account, but the number wasn't his old one. It was new, different area code. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. Every rational thought battled the impossible image of my son, typing those words. Outside, wind rattled the porch chimes. The night felt charged, like the world was holding its breath. I picked up the phone again. Reread the message. Once, twice, the screen trembled in my hand because I was trembling. Dad, come to my house. Now. I whispered the words aloud, as if speaking them might make them vanish. They didn't. I grabbed my keys. My body moved before my brain caught up. The chair screeched backward, ice rattled in the empty glass. And within seconds I was out the door, engine turning over, headlights slicing through rain that had started without me noticing. Grief, they say, makes you see ghosts. I wasn't sure what I was driving toward, proof of madness or a miracle. But the message kept burning in my mind, each letter a pulse, D-A-N. If anyone had seen me that night speeding through the wet streets, they'd have thought I was fleeing something. Maybe I was. Because deep down, beneath the shock and the whiskey, I felt something colder than hope and sharper than fear, a certainty that whatever waited for me in that house would change everything I thought I knew about death, love and the people we trust to mourn us. If grief is a fog, paperwork is its opposite, sharp edges, boxes to tick, lines that can cut you if you stare too long. That's what the next 48 hours felt like, slicing the fog into forms, affidavits, and notarized signatures. Dan's kitchen table turned into a war room. He laid out folders labeled in his neat block handwriting, Insurance AC, Will Revision, Contingency Instructions. David Chen, legal, it looked more like an audit than a resurrection. I wrote these the week before the heart attack, he said. They activate automatically if Ava does what I knew she'd do. You knew she'd try to cash in. I knew she couldn't resist trying. He flipped open the first folder. Inside lay 3 identical letters addressed to separate life insurance carriers. Each began the same way, to whom it may concern. If this correspondence reaches you following my reported death, it indicates my suspicion that the beneficiary, Ava Collins Walker, may have obtained policies by fraudulent or coercive means. He had even included certified copies of their marriage license and her signed application pages, annotated in red circles where the handwriting differed from his. At the bottom, his signature, perfectly real, dated and witnessed by 2 colleagues who thought it was just another compliance exercise. I ran a thumb over the embossed notary stamp. You planned your own accusation. I planned my defense, he said quietly. If I died for real, I wanted the truth to outlive me. The next folder held his revised will, a concise, lawyerly document removing Ava as heir and naming me sole executor. Clause 14b referenced evidence of infidelity or financial malfeasance. The ink shimmered where it had dried too fast. He must have signed it in haste. Then came the spreadsheet. Dates. Routing numbers, small withdrawals building into a pattern. She was moving money to an account in Marco Ruiz's name, he said. Started with little transfers, testing if I'd notice. I remembered the day Dan had called to ask if I'd seen any odd charges on our joint investment account. I'd brushed it off. Probably a refund posting weird, I'd said. I felt that sentence claw its way back up my throat. He passed me his phone. On it, a recording of a call with David Chen. If you go through with this, Daniel, you'll need a living will, 2 witnesses, timestamp, independent counsel. And your father should stay clear until the disputes trigger. Dan, he doesn't even know yet. Chen, then keep it that way. Grief sells better when it's genuine. Hearing my own unknowing used as evidence made my chest tighten. Dan saw it. I'm sorry, Dad, I hated keeping you in the dark, I nodded. You did it to keep me alive. Let's stick with that story, he half smiled. Then we need you to play your part, my part. The grieving father. Visits to the grave. Phone calls I wouldn't answer. Statements about how Ava's handling things privately. He handed me a printed script, lines, pauses, even the tone. Say it like you mean it, but not like you rehearsed it, he advised. People can smell rehearsal. We spent hours cross-checking dates. When the death certificate was filed, when the insurance claims were likely submitted, when the Bureau's embargo on his whistleblower file would lift. Everything ran on parallel tracks, the lie of his death and the truth of her greed. By midnight, I'd stopped trying to understand and started taking notes like an apprentice thief learning a code. Lewis, we'll keep the hospital side quiet, Dan said. He already logged the incident as a data loss investigation, not medical error. If anyone asks, they'll hit confidentiality walls. And the Bureau, they think I'm under protection, which technically I am. He gave a small shrug. Just not their kind. Outside, rain thudded against the windows. He poured us both coffee. No whiskey this time. My hand still shook when I lifted the cup. Do you ever stop being scared? I asked. He thought about it. You trade one kind of fear for another. Before, I was scared they'd kill me. Now I'm scared she'll get away with it. The confession landed like truth usually does, heavy and simple. We spent the next day drafting a timeline for David Chen to hold in escrow. Day 0, death recorded. Day 3, public obituary posted. Day 5, insurance claims likely filed. Day 6, social media monitoring begins. Dan even wrote a trigger phrase for Chen. If any post suggests celebration, travel, or romantic companionship inconsistent with mourning, file the disputes. Inconsistent with mourning, I repeated. You really have a lawyer's soul. Experience writes better clauses than law school, he said. When we finished, the table looked like a crime scene of paper, evidence, motive, signatures. The only thing missing was the blood, and I suppose we'd already buried that. As I gathered the folders, Dan added one more, plain manila, unmarked. Inside were screenshots of text threads between Ava and Marco, heart emojis, hotel confirmations, a selfie in front of a showroom convertible captioned, "Our future ride." She used my credit card for that deposit, he said. She didn't even bother to change the billing address. She never thought she'd have to answer for it, I said. Then let's make sure she does. We took the documents to a notary that afternoon. The clerk never blinked when I introduced myself as executor of the late Daniel Walker's estate. She stamped everything, smiled, offered condolences, and moved on to her next client. Bureaucracy doesn't question death. It just files it. Back in the parking lot, the wind smelled of wet asphalt and gasoline. Dan stayed low in the passenger seat, hood up. I watched people come and go, normal lives unburdened by layers of lies, and wondered how many carried secrets as fragile as ours. He exhaled slowly. 2 weeks, he said again. That's all it'll take. Until what? Until she gives us proof we don't even have to look for. I started the car. The dashboard clock read 3:17 p.m. Somewhere across town, Ava's plane tickets to Mexico were probably printing. She thought she'd already buried both of us, him in the ground. Me in grief. She was wrong on both counts. That night I sat at my kitchen table, the same chair, the same hum of the fridge, but this time I wasn't staring at her photo. I was watching the clock, waiting for the hour that would start her undoing. Paperwork, I decided, might be the cleanest revenge of all. If there's one thing grief teaches you, it's how to perform. For 2 weeks straight, I played the role of a heartbroken father, every sigh rehearsed, every word measured. The trick was to look shattered, not suspicious. I visited the cemetery twice a week. Same flowers, same spot. The headstone looked too new, the soil too neat. Beneath it, nothing but a weighted coffin filled with linens and rocks. I stood there longer than anyone needed to, letting people see what they expected. A man who couldn't let go. Such a tragedy, Mrs. Henderson from down the street said one morning. Poor Ava. I heard she's staying with her sister in Phoenix. I nodded like a man too weary for details. She needs time. Time. That's what everyone thought Ava needed. In truth, she was spending hers in paradise. Every night when I got home, I'd log into Instagram, something I'd sworn never to do again. And there she was, living loud under tropical skies. New photos every day. Ava in a silk sundress laughing under palm trees. Ava and Marco clinking champagne glasses at sunset. Ava's sister commenting, "So proud of you for moving on, sis, moving on." Those words felt like gravel between my teeth. I kept screenshots of everything: dates, captions, comments, geotags. Each image a confession, each like a witness. Meanwhile, Dan, hiding under his new name Robert Hale, was doing the same from a borrowed laptop in a tiny apartment outside the city. "She's giving us more evidence than we could ever ask for," he said during one of our secret diner meetings. Insurance fraud investigators love social media. It's self-documenting crime, he said it dryly. Like an accountant balancing karma, we'd meet at a greasy spoon off Highway 9, where no one cared who you were as long as you tipped. Dan always sat facing the door, hood pulled low, while I pretended to read the paper. He'd slide me updates scribbled on napkins, claim filing dates, payment confirmations, timestamps from her photos that matched wire transfers. "She filed for payout within 3 days of the funeral," he said once. "Policy number ending in 7041. The funds hit her account yesterday." I stared at the figures. $750,000. $500,000 in insurance money, I murmured. "And she's spending it like Monopoly cash," he nodded. Exactly what we needed. By week's end, the pattern was undeniable. Wire transfers to resort bookings, jewelry store charges, lodge withdrawals labeled personal gift, then a deposit of $50,000 into Marco Ruiz's account. "She's paying him off," I said. "Or buying his silence," Dan replied. "But silence is expensive. Let's see how long he stays quiet when her cards stop working." That part came sooner than we expected. The morning it happened, I woke to 6 missed calls from Ava. Her messages were frantic, her voice high, brittle. "Henry, please call me. Something's wrong with my bank. The hotel says my card was declined. Henry, I can't access any of my accounts. They're saying investigation hold. Do you know anything? Henry, please, I'm scared. They won't let me check out until I pay cash. Please help me. I didn't delete them. I saved everyone." Evidence sings better when it comes with emotion. That afternoon, I met Dan again. He looked calmer than I'd seen him since the night in the kitchen. "The disputes went through," he said. 3 companies froze all connected accounts pending review. I smiled without meaning to. She's about to learn what new beginnings really cost. By evening, Ava's Instagram went quiet. No new posts. The woman who couldn't go 2 hours without updating her followers suddenly vanished. But the internet has a way of talking even when you don't. Her friends posted comments under her last photo. "Where are you, girl? Hope you're okay. Heard something about the FBI?" It spread faster than wildfire. Rumors of fraud, whispers of fake policies, the digital smell of scandal. Dan monitored everything from his side. "She's stranded," he told me. "Marco flew back to Chicago this morning. He drained the joint account before leaving. Left her broke and cornered. And now the Bureau's got questions." I almost pitied her. Almost. For a man pretending to grieve, I was alarmingly busy. I called David Chen under the guise of handling estate affairs. He confirmed the Bureau had opened a preliminary fraud case, triggered automatically by the insurance carrier's disputes. "She'll get the call within 48 hours, Chen said. "You'll get one too as executor. Keep your answers simple. You only know what's public. What about Dan? Officially, still deceased. Let's keep it that way for another week. Every night I rehearsed my lies in the mirror. I'm coping the best I can. Yes, it was sudden. No, Ava's been distant, but grief is strange. I hated how easy it came out of my mouth. The neighbors brought food, and I accepted it. A casserole, a pie, a lasagna, the currency of sympathy. I placed them all in the freezer untouched. I wasn't hungry for food. I was hungry for justice. By the start of week 2, Ava's voice turned from panic to desperation. "Henry, please, I know you can hear me. I need help. The hotel says I can't leave until I settle my bill. I'm out of money. Marco's gone. I just need a small wire until I get back." I listened to her messages over and over. There was no remorse in them, only fear of losing comfort. She didn't miss my son. She missed the money. That night I called Dan. "She's cornered," I said. "What happens now?" "Now we wait for the Bureau to bite," he said. "They'll freeze her passport within 24 hours. And when she comes crawling home, then we show her exactly what she buried." I pictured it, the moment she'd step onto the porch, see the FBI notice taped to the door, the locks changed, her old life sealed behind legal ink. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. On the 14th day, Dan sent one final message through the encrypted app he used, all triggers complete. Prepare for confrontation, 2 weeks of pretending, 2 weeks of lies. And finally, the stage was set. As I sat in my dark kitchen that night, I played Ava's last voicemail again, the one where her voice cracked. "Henry, I don't know what's happening. Please, I'm scared. I should have felt pity." But pity was for people who made mistakes. Ava hadn't made a mistake. She'd made a choice, and come morning, that choice would meet its consequence. The night Ava came home, the air itself felt nervous. Cold still, like it knew what was coming. It was a Friday, 2 weeks to the day since I'd stood over an empty coffin. Dan and I had met that afternoon at a diner on the edge of town, finalizing what he called the confrontation. He had the same intensity he used to get before a big client pitch, only this time the numbers weren't financial. They were morale. "She'll be back tonight," he said confidently, sliding his phone across the table. "Her sister wired her just enough for a one-way ticket. How can you be sure?" "Because guilt always runs home, Dad. It's the only place left to hide." He'd already arranged everything. The locksmith had changed the house locks that afternoon. An FBI notice, real and legally binding, was taped to the front door, warning that the property was under investigation for insurance and financial fraud. The lights inside were dark. The perfect stage. "Remember," Dan said, "you're still the grieving father. Don't tip that I'm alive. Let her confess with her own mouth." He gave me a look, steady, careful. The kind of look men give each other when stepping over a line they can't uncross. By the time the phone rang that night, I was ready. "Henry," Ava's voice cracked through the receiver. "Thank God you answered. I just got home. Something's wrong with the locks. My key doesn't work, and there's some paper on the door from the FBI. I can't read it properly. It's dark. Please, can you come?" I hesitated for effect. "The FBI?" "Yes. I don't understand what's happening. Please, I'm scared." I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her sweat. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said finally, and hung up. When I pulled up, the porch light flickered weakly, casting a sickly yellow glow over the notice pinned to the door. The words, "Federal investigation," gleamed in the light like a sentence already served. Ava was pacing in the driveway, wearing wrinkled clothes, hair tied back, mascara smudged beneath swollen eyes. She looked like someone who'd just run out of stories to tell. "Henry," she called out, voice trembling. Thank God I didn't know what else to do. I walked toward her slowly, keeping my tone neutral. "What's going on, Ava?" She pointed at the notice. That's what I was hoping you could tell me. Why would the FBI be here? What did they think I did?" Her voice rose with practiced panic, but there was no sincerity in it. "Not for me, not for Dan. Maybe we should go inside," I said. "I'll read it for you." She followed as I approached the door. I pulled the paper free and held it up under the porch light. The heading was bold, impersonal, merciless. Property under federal review, pending investigation of insurance fraud, falsified claims, and financial misrepresentation. Ava pressed her hands to her mouth. "Insurance fraud? That's insane." I filed those claims legally. Dan had life insurance. He handled everything. I just followed what the company told me. Her voice cracked perfectly on cue. Too perfectly. "Ava," I said softly, "where have you been the last 2 weeks?" "Phoenix," she blurted out. "With my sister. I needed to get away from everything. To clear my head." "Phoenix," I repeated like I was tasting the word. "Hot place for mourning." Her eyes flicked nervously. "The doctor said travel might help with depression." I didn't think it would matter. "Did the doctor also recommend Cancún?" I asked, letting the word drop like a stone. The color drained from her face. "What?" I took my phone out and swiped to a photo. Her own smiling face, red bikini, drink in hand, Marco's arms snug around her waist. I turned the screen toward her. "This was posted while I was giving your husband's eulogy," I said quietly. She stumbled back like the air had punched her. "Henry, please, that's not what it looks like." "It looks exactly like what it is," I cut in. You were in Cancún, celebrating with another man, while your husband's body, what I thought was his body, was being lowered into the ground. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You don't understand. I loved Dan, but he was sick. He'd changed. He was paranoid, drinking, saying people were after him. I couldn't take it anymore. I raised an eyebrow. You mean when he discovered Archimedes' fraud and refused to take hush money? That kind of paranoia? Her mouth fell open. How do you know about that? Because I know everything now, I said. The forged insurance forms, the policies you opened in secret, the fake signatures, the investigator you hired to document his decline. It's all been turned over to the FBI, every last receipt. She shook her head violently. No, I didn't forge anything. I just signed what he gave me. Wrong again, I said, pulling up a second image, a scanned policy application with her handwriting circled. This is you. Down to the curl on the W, we checked. The forensics team will confirm it. Her breathing turned ragged. Henry, you have to believe me. Marco told me everything was legal. He said the money was safe. Marco Ruiz, I asked. The same Marco who emptied your joint account yesterday and caught the first flight back to Chicago. She froze. I stepped closer. He left you, Ava. He took your money, your lies, and your future. Now the FBI has your passport flagged and your accounts frozen. Her hands trembled. Please, she whispered. You have to help me. You're the only family I have left. You had family, I said coldly. You buried it when you buried that empty coffin. She dropped to the porch steps, sobbing. I let her cry. For the first time in years, I didn't feel pity. I felt closure. I turned to leave. Henry, she called after me. Tell them I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Please, just tell them I was confused. I stopped at the edge of the driveway and looked back. Confused is forgetting your car keys, Ava. What you did was deliberate. I climbed into my truck, and as I drove away, I saw her collapse against the doorframe. The FBI notice fluttering beside her like a flag, marking the end of everything she thought she'd won. By the time I reached the main road, my phone buzzed. A text from Dan, she called. Perfect timing. Stage 1 complete. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. The storm had broken. I didn't know what would come next. The arrest, the investigation, the trial. But I knew one thing for sure. Justice had finally come home. The next morning began with sirens. Not the screaming kind that tear through traffic. These were lower, steadier, almost bored. Government vehicles don't rush. They arrive. By the time the sun climbed over the rooftops, Ava Collins Walker's name had turned from rumor to headline. Local widow arrested in insurance fraud scheme. It sounded too neat for the mess she'd made. I wasn't there to see it, but I didn't need to be. Dan and I were sitting in a diner off Highway 9, same booth, same cracked vinyl seat, when the notification lit up his burner phone. He didn't even look surprised. It's done, he said simply, setting the phone between us. On the screen, a news alert. Federal agents detain widow in connection with multi-million-dollar insurance fraud. I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. How bad? He shrugged. Bad enough. 3 counts. Fraud, conspiracy, falsified documents. Maybe money laundering if they dig deep enough. She won't post bail. I stared at my coffee, watching the ripples from my shaking hand. You sound almost calm. I've been waiting to exhale for 6 months, he said. Calm is the first real feeling I've had. There was a hollowness in his tone that didn't match the words. Revenge stories always sound satisfying in theory. In real life, they leave you wondering what's left once the fire burns out. Dan opened a folder, one of many, and slid me a printed news release. The Bureau's statement confirmed what we'd hoped. Victor Lang, the CEO who had orchestrated the pharmaceutical cover-up, had died in custody the night before. Heart attack, the article said. Dan stared at that line for a long time. Fitting, huh? Poetic, I said. Poetic's another word for unfinished, he muttered. Lang dies quietly, and Ava sits in a holding cell crying. Meanwhile, everyone else just goes back to work. That's justice, son. It doesn't always clap. Sometimes it just ends. He gave a small nod but didn't answer. We sat there a while, the way men do when there's nothing left to say. The waitress refilled our cups without asking questions. The smell of bacon and coffee mixed with the kind of silence that used to exist between us when we fished. Comfortable but heavy. When I finally spoke, my voice came out lower. "You ever think about what comes next?" He gave a bitter half-smile. "For who?" "For you. You can't stay Robert Hale forever, I know." Lewis is prepping the paperwork for the hospital reversal. Administrative error, remember? He took a long sip of his coffee. "In a few weeks I'll be officially back from the dead. The hospital apologizes, the press eats it up, the bureau wraps the case with a bow. And me? You go back to being what you always were," he said softly. "A father who lost a son and found the truth instead." That last line hurt in ways I didn't expect. I drove him back to the safe house after breakfast. The wind carried that dry early spring chill, the kind that smells like wet dirt and old promises. When we pulled up, he hesitated before getting out. "She's going to call you, Dad." I frowned. "Ava, she can't. She gets one phone call before processing. She'll use it on you." I didn't argue. I just nodded and waited. Sure enough, the call came that evening. "Unknown number. Federal Detention Center area code. Mr. Walker?" The voice on the line asked, tinny and distant. "You have a call from inmate Ava Collins Walker. Do you accept?" I said yes. There was a pause, then a shaky exhale. "Henry," she whispered. I didn't speak. "I don't know how this happened," she said. "They're saying things, fake policies, forged signatures, but I didn't mean—" "You meant every dollar," I said, cutting her off. "I loved him." She cried. "I swear I did. Marco tricked me. He said Dan was gone, that we'd start over. You started over before the dirt settled," I said quietly. She sobbed into the receiver. The sound was ugly, real, almost animal. "Please tell them I didn't know about the money. Please, Henry, they'll listen to you." I could hear the desperation. I could also hear the part of her that still thought manipulation might save her. "I already told them the truth," I said. "What truth?" "That my son was too good for you. That's all they needed." I hung up before she could answer. Later that night I met Dan again. He looked exhausted but freer somehow. We sat outside his safe house on the back porch, the sound of distant traffic mixing with crickets. She called. He asked, "Yeah, what did she say?" "Same thing all guilty people say, that she's innocent," he chuckled dryly. Classic. We fell quiet again. Then he turned serious. "You know, I thought I'd feel satisfied when this was over, but I just feel empty." "That's how justice feels," I said. "It's never joy, it's just the noise stopping." He nodded slowly. "I guess that's still better than the noise." The next few days unfolded like clockwork. News reports ran the story every hour. FBI busts insurance fraud ring tied to pharma scandal. Ava's face filled the screens. No filters, no makeup, just a mugshot that looked more honest than any photo she'd ever taken. They said she'd pleaded partial cooperation. Tried to name Marco as the mastermind. But Marco was gone, vanished after draining her accounts. The Bureau issued a warrant, but he'd already crossed into Mexico using cash withdrawals she'd funded herself. Poetic symmetry again. By the end of the week, Ava was denied bail. The preliminary hearing set for next month. Charges stacked tall enough to crush her, even without a conviction. David Chen called me personally. "Henry, the case is strong. She'll likely take a plea. 5 to 10 years, maybe more. Will she try to drag Dan into it?" I asked. "She can't," he said calmly. "Legally, he doesn't exist. And when he does, he'll be under full Bureau protection, as a cooperating whistleblower. She'll never see him again." I thanked him and hung up. That night, I poured a single glass of whiskey, the same kind I'd poured the night I thought my son was gone. Only this time it tasted different. Not sweet, not bitter, just clean. Outside my window, the wind rustled the trees. Somewhere in that sound, I imagined Ava sitting in a cold cell, wondering how it had all slipped away. I imagined Marco counting her stolen money, thinking he'd won, and I imagined Dan, alive, scarred, but free, finally sleeping without looking over his shoulder for the first time since this nightmare began. I allowed myself to believe we'd made it through. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't glorious. It was quiet, patient and merciless, and for the first time in a long while, so was I. You can't resurrect a man quietly, not in this age. You have to choreograph it like theatre, press statements, doctor apologies, official letters with stamps and seals that look important enough to make a lie real. Dan's resurrection began 3 weeks after Ava's arrest. By then, the story had cooled from scandal to sidebar. Her bail denied, her lawyer hinting at mental distress. Marco still missing. The Bureau had what it needed. The rest, they said, was administrative closure. David Chen called me that Monday morning. "Henry," he said, his voice almost cheerful, "are you ready to be shocked?" "I've had enough shocks to last me," I muttered. "Well, brace yourself anyway. The hospital's issuing a public apology for data misclassification leading to erroneous death certification. Dr. Lewis Grant is taking the fall, but it's all part of the arrangement. Dan's medical record is being reactivated under full protection. In 2 days, he's back from the dead, legally. Just like that. Just like that. We'll call it a miracle of bureaucracy." The phrase stuck with me. A miracle of bureaucracy. 2 days later, I found myself standing in a hospital lobby I'd visited only once before, on the night I thought I'd lost my son. Now, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the same cheap coffee smell filling the air, and a banner stretched across the reception desk. Riverdale Medical Center statement of clarification, patient record error, corrected. Administrative confusion leads to misreported death. The kind of phrasing that says everything and nothing. Dan arrived through the back entrance, escorted by 2 bureau agents in plain clothes. His hair was shorter now, his beard trimmed, but his eyes still held that quiet watchfulness of a man who's seen behind the curtain. When he saw me, his mouth twitched into something like a smile. "Guess we're back in the land of the living," I laughed softly. "You sure you want to be here?" "I'm not sure of anything," he said. "But it's time." Dr. Grant met us in a consultation room, tired but composed. "Mr. Walker, Dan," he corrected himself, "I've drafted the official statement. The hospital takes full responsibility for the administrative confusion. You'll be listed as found alive following misidentification." Dan's brows lifted. "Misidentification?" Grant nodded. "We'll blame it on charting errors during the system upgrade. It's dull enough to be believable." He handed me a copy of the press release. It was written in that perfect bureaucratic language, so vague it could mean anything, so polished it sounded true. By afternoon, the local news had it. Man declared dead, found alive after hospital error. "I'm just grateful to have another chance," says Henry Walker. "The father who never gave up hope." I hadn't said those words, but the reporter thought they sounded good, so they printed them. Dan's reappearance went viral for a few hours. Hashtags about miracles, family reunited, blessing in disguise. People love a comeback story. They never ask who wrote the script. By sunset we were home. Not his old house, it still reeked of the investigation, but my place, quiet and modest. He sat by the kitchen window, staring out at the same oak tree he used to climb as a kid. "Feels weird," he said. "The world thinks I came back from the dead, but really I just came back from paperwork." "That's how most resurrections happen," I said. "Nobody walks on water anymore, they just walk through loopholes." He chuckled, then turned serious. "Do you think people ever really get to start over?" I thought about Ava sitting in a cell somewhere, about Marco hiding with stolen money, about Victor Lang dying with his secrets. "No," I said finally, "but you can start right." "That's close enough." The next day, the Bureau invited Dan to give a closed debrief. I waited in the lobby while agents in suits whisked him through metal detectors. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a kind voice, stopped to shake my hand. "Your son's been brave, Mr. Walker. He risked everything to bring that company down." "I know," I said quietly. He almost brought himself down with it. When the meeting ended hours later, Dan looked lighter. "It's done," he said simply. "They've closed the case. My whistleblower immunity's official. What about Ava? She took a plea deal this morning. 10 years. No trial, 10 years. Enough time to think, maybe not enough to change. We drove home in silence, letting the city fade behind us. Every streetlight we passed felt like a checkpoint we'd survived. That night, as I poured 2 glasses of whiskey, I asked him, "What now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I work under my real name again, consulting, clean projects only. And maybe," he added after a pause, "I write something about what happened. Without the names, people will think it's fiction," I said. He shrugged. "Good. Fiction makes the truth easier to swallow." We toasted quietly, glasses clinking like punctuation marks on the end of a long sentence. Before bed, I stepped outside. The air was cool, the sky soft with stars. The town had gone still, unaware that a man once thought dead was sleeping under its roofs again. Inside, Dan's light was still on. I could see his shadow moving across the curtain, alive, busy, rebuilding. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe we might actually get a normal morning again. The world would move on. News cycles would forget. But I wouldn't. I'd remember the empty coffin, the texts, the late-night planning, the silence between sirens. People would call it a miracle. I knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was justice disguised as resurrection, and sometimes that's the only kind of miracle this world still allows. 6 months passed before life began to sound like life again. No lawyers, no agents, no coded phone calls, just quiet mornings and honest work. Dan rented a small office downtown under his new business name, Morrison Consulting, using his mother's maiden name for good measure. He said he liked the sound of it, clean, simple, unattached to ghosts. Sometimes, when I stopped by, I'd see him hunched over spreadsheets, phone wedged to his ear, talking to clients about ethical compliance, risk management, or integrity frameworks. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "I used to sell lies for a living," he told me once, closing his laptop. "Now I charge people to tell the truth." He smiled, but his eyes stayed tired. You don't fake your death and come back unchanged. Something inside him had aged faster than his face. Ava's sentencing came that summer. The courtroom was small, the audience smaller. She looked different, thinner, pale, her hands cuffed in front of her like she was afraid they'd disappear if she let go. The judge read her charges in a voice that didn't care about her tears. Insurance fraud, falsified documentation, obstruction, conspiracy. Her lawyer tried to frame it as grief-driven recklessness. "A widow overwhelmed by loss," he said, "who made terrible mistakes, but the prosecutor had the timestamps, the receipts, and the photos." Her sunlit smile on a Cancún beach while I was at the funeral podium. When the judge handed down 12 years with eligibility for parole after 8, Ava broke down. Her sobs echoed off the courtroom walls, high and hollow. I didn't stay to watch her being led away. I'd already seen enough exits. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. "Mr. Walker," one of them shouted, "how does it feel to finally have justice?" I paused long enough to answer honestly. "It doesn't feel like justice," I said. "It feels like quiet." That evening, Dan and I drove to the cemetery. The grass had settled over his grave. The headstone clean, simple, Daniel Walker, 1989, 2023. It would stay there. We'd agreed to leave it untouched, a marker for the man he used to be. He stood over it for a long while, hands in his pockets. "You ever think about how weird this is?" he asked. "Standing at your own grave." I nodded. "Every time I look in the mirror, I think about things that should have killed me but didn't." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what surviving is, just learning to live with ghosts that look like you." We left flowers. Not lilies this time, sunflowers. He said they looked forward instead of down. Driving home, the radio played an old blues song, something about second chances and the price you pay for them. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. That night, over dinner, Dan finally asked, "Do you ever regret it?" "What we did?" I thought for a moment before answering. "No. Regret is for people who didn't have a choice. We did what we had to do." He nodded slowly. "Still, sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I just let it all burn instead of faking the flames." "You'd be dead," I said simply. "And she'd be rich." That's not justice. That's surrender. He raised his glass, a quiet toast to the line between those two words. After that night, we stopped talking about the past. Some stories end not because everything's said, but because the silence means more. As summer waned, Dan started mentoring young analysts, teaching them to spot falsified data, showing them how to read between numbers. He told them about ethics, but never about Ava or Archimede. That chapter stayed sealed. Once, a student asked him what made him so passionate about honesty. He smiled and said, "Because lies almost killed me. Watching him rebuild piece by piece was like seeing a house repaired after a fire. You could still smell the smoke, but at least it stood. As for me, I found my own strange peace. The neighbors still looked at me like a man who'd been through something too complicated to explain. They weren't wrong. I took up gardening again, fixed the back fence, learned that forgiveness isn't something you offer others. It's something you stop refusing yourself. Sometimes, when the evening light hits just right, I still see Ava as she was. The laughing woman at family dinners, not the stranger in the mugshot. And in that same light, I see the man my son became because of her betrayal. Harder, wiser, alive. A few weeks later, I got a letter from the bureau, a simple note thanking Dan for his cooperation, signed by the director himself. I framed it in my study, not because of pride, but because it reminded me that even in a crooked world, someone somewhere had the courage to set one thing straight. The final loose thread arrived in a phone call. They'd found Marco in Belize, arrested for identity theft. He'd been living under a new name, spending what was left of Ava's stolen money. When I told Dan, he didn't even look up from his paperwork. Poetic, he said, and that was it. No champagne, no victory laps. Just two men quietly exhaling after too many months of holding their breath. On the first anniversary of his death, we returned to the cemetery again. The day was cool, the air still. Dan placed a single sunflower on the grave and said softly, "Rest in peace, whoever I was." I put a hand on his shoulder. "The dead don't get peace, son. The living earn it." We stood there until the light began to fade, then walked back to the truck in silence. The wind moved gently through the trees, whispering like it was carrying the past away, one leaf at a time. As we drove home, Dan turned on the radio, an old station playing jazz this time, and said, "You know, Dad, I don't think I believe in miracles anymore." "Good," I said, "because what we did wasn't one." He glanced at me, half smiling. "What was it then?" "Proof," I said, "that sometimes the truth has to die before it can live again." The road stretched out ahead of us, quiet and endless, the way all endings should be.